Hi folks, how's it going? Welcome to the next edition of Serverless Craic with myself, Dave Anderson, a technical fellow for Bizarre Voice, author and contributor here at the Serverless Edge.
Mark McCann, author and contributor to Serverless Edge, and now architect at Globalization Partners.
Woohoo!
Hello, Mark. Michael O'Reilly, architect at Globalization Partners now with Mark. Very, very exciting times, and also a contributor at the Serverless Edge.
Good stuff. So we'll continue our journey through the well-architected pillars and our quest to find our favorite pillar. We're now on, well, there's no order, but we're under the fifth pillar now, which is cost optimization. I think this is one of my favorite ones because basically no one understands it, knows what it is. I think it's getting much better now with modern cloud, but again, like the other pillars, I think there's 10 questions here, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different kind of subsections. I'll just read them out. It's practice cloud financial management, expenditure awareness, cost-effective resources, matching supply and demand, and optimizing over time. But the first one here is brilliant, which is practice cloud financial management. It's like, how do you implement cloud financial management? And I would say most people say, we don't know what that is.
Yep.
I always thought it was great fun to ask a development team, how much did that cost when they tell you about something? And I'd say most of the time you get back a blank stare.
Yeah, it's definitely a maturity step for some of the teams to say, well, do you know how much your stack costs? And like if you get the blank stares, then you know to dig a little deeper about some of their operational excellence and some of their observability and just general sort of engineering practices, because good engineers are having awareness of this, and good teams have an awareness of this, but they just need to be pointed in the right direction. So, cloud financial management doesn't need to be big, scary, sort of loads of spreadsheets. It can be just as simple as, do you know your monthly bill? Do you know your weekly bill?
Yeah, it's big shift in architecture, I think, since we've got more sort of visibility in the cost in the last number of years. Like you think back when you were kind of working in the enterprises and you're on the mainframes and you really were dealing in how much capacity you had on those things, and maybe you did get into licensing and sort of availability of licensing that again, but you never talked in terms of cost, whereas now, moving out of the mainframes into the cloud, and you can kind of go expansive, extrapolate sort of architecture out to fit whatever scale you're working to. Yeah, you definitely have to factor financial, cloud or your cloud financial management in your decision making with regards to architecture. So
I think back in the enterprise, I used to see some of those things, and the question was, is it 5 figures, 6 figures, or 7 figures the cost? Is it many hundreds of thousands or millions? But now it's a great question, as Mark says, assess if a developer knows what they're talking about, because the first question you can ask is, how much did that cost? And if they turn around and go $16, you go, okay, you know that's good.
And I think now, especially moving into the serverless sort of world and the microservice world, your costs can fluctuate rapidly up and down if you're not aware of it. But in the past, it would have been all bought 5 years ago and tax efficient and written off, and you've paid down over multiple years, and what you designed and implemented wouldn't have had a big impact on a lot of that. So I think now, the success or failure of your entire organization, depending on the scale, could come down to how well you manage your cloud costs.
Yeah, and there's a good tip as well. If you're ever interviewing a developer and they tell you about this fantastic system, just ask them, how much does that cost a day? That'll unpack a lot of stuff. That's unpopular advice. Sorry, developers.
Yeah, and even though it's one question here, there's a huge amount of behind this. You kind of go really deep with savings plans and tagging and just being very savvy and very skilled about how you do your cloud financial management. And you can start to see the emergence of a cloud economics sort of role as well. Cloud economist role is starting to see emerging.
I think what's really interesting here, and what the cloud providers have been clever about, is they're targeting the CFOs. So this is the partnership between the CFO and the CTO. So the CFO team will have like FinOps people. So this is a great excuse. If you're a savvy architect, you can go talk to the financial department and start figuring out, how the billing and costs and budgets link up with your architecture. And that's a great way to drive an improvement. Instead of just saying, we want to refactor this because it's cool, we want to refactor this because we think we can save $500,000 as much. And the so-and-so in finance has told me this.
And Dave, remember, back in the day, it's the reason, like even when you look at that sort of expenditure awareness, particularly for serverless teams, is that I forget the name of the two types of financial sort of plans.
CapEx, OpEx.
CapEx and OpEx. So yeah, the capital expenditure is, I think that's, you plan that all up front, and then your OpEx is kind of stuff that maybe is not sort of planned for, and typically like
pay as you go.
Yeah, your dynamic workloads kind of typically fell into the OpEx, and I definitely a lot of organizations struggled with the transition from one.
Well, even not even serverless, just the cloud in general. The fact that even you don't know what your bill is going to be for that month. With the data centers, like people paid for things like 3 years in advance, and then you can offset it with tax and all that kind of funky stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's setting expectations around CapEx versus OpEx is critically important, especially for business partners who maybe aren't aware of this. Is why did my bill go from £50 to 3,000 this week? Yeah. Oh, well, we ran a load test because we were adding this new feature. So you need to be very upfront and very good at setting expectations about this will fluctuate up and down, and here's why. And again, it gets back to the clarity of purpose, understanding what you're doing, and then being able to articulate that in a business way really starts to link up business and IT together.
Or even worse, we Jimmy ran a load test and then went off on holidays and forgot to turn it off.
Yes.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a few of those incidents happen in the past. Like,
just Jimmy's made up.
We Jimmy. But then in terms of Wee Jimmy, sort of what Wee Jimmy would have learned is that, and I've seen a few teams do this and actually do it quite well, and it's because like a lot of the cloud providers, they show you how your cost is calculated. You can kind of replicate those algorithms in your dashboards, so you can kind of then through your throughput be able to kind of try and predict costs in your own kind of dashboards, and sort of a lot of our squads.
And how many developers have come to your desk in the morning with the blood drained from their face going, I think I just spent $20,000. And it's like, okay, this is a good way to get some focus on well architected.
Yeah. And I think that brings it into the whole expenditure awareness section of the question set here, and it is that it's growing that awareness. Education is critical here. You're making teams aware of these things are available to you. You can go and look at these, and with the revamp of the console as well, having cost now as the first screen that you see, again, cost awareness is going to grow even more and more, especially with like all the stuff we talked about, that your cost usage is going to be operational expenditure, and it will be critical to your profitability of your business. It's not going to be written off from 10 years ago.
Yeah, and that next session, expenditure awareness. I mean, it's simple stuff, but for some developers, is very new. So how do you govern usage? How do you monitor usage and cost? And how do you decommission? Like, how do you switch things off? That's not something developers of yesteryear had to worry about. That was very much a sysadmin thing. So the fact that, people could potentially be getting alerts or emails saying you left this running over the weekend, that's all good warnings and alerts. They drive the right behavior, because, it is real money being spent on these things.
Yeah, 100%. And, like I do think with this one as well, I know it's probably not on it, but typically tagging, this is where tagging your resources, and sort of this is where you have to get into that sort of level of discipline. But
that's monitoring, because if something's not tagged properly, then it's not monitored, but you still have to pay for it.
Yeah, so it makes it's definitely worthwhile to think about your tagging and sort of how you're tagging certain things, in terms of being able to group them.
And I always think, I mean, if you're in a leadership position, you should be able to see a breakdown. If you have 5 applications in your portfolio, you should be able to say, well, tell me what was the cost breakdown from those 5 at the very least. So it's normal to see a breakdown. That's not that hard to do. So it should be asked for.
And even from the governing usage, just some of the initial guardrails, how you set up your organizations, how you set up your service control policies. If you're going to be a serverless first shop, maybe you can just turn off all the non-serverless sort of capabilities that are very expensive if they're left running. So there's ways to establish good guardrails that give you the best opportunity for cost optimization.
So that's the popular allow list, or allow list just only allows serverless services. So you'd be popular, Mark.
Well, it's serverless first, not serverless only. But if you come with a real articulated excuse or reason why the serverless capabilities don't work, then we'll alter the policy, right?
An exception for EC2 class. Very good. So the next one then is cost-effective resources, and that's kind of actually leads on nicely. You know, there are lots of different ways to kind of skin a cat when you're building something, but you know, as developers, you'd always want to pick the fastest and the craziest and the wildest thing, but also is it more cost effective? Sometimes you don't need the fastest thing. You know, something just of a moderate speed will do the job. I mean, this points to the sustainability stuff as well.
Yeah.
It's not how fast can you get it, it's how fast do you need to provide adequate service.
Yeah, and I think it's the total cost of ownership really comes to the fore here. You know, it's not just what for right now, what's the long-term operational burden and cost for some of these things. You know, if you choose a technology that's super low cost, but it's the cognitive burden is massive. It's a new technology that's outside your team right now. Then you know, what's the learning cost for that team to learn that tech stack or that language that you chose for cost efficiency reasons, right? So you just got to take a bigger view on this. It's not just for what you're doing right now.
And I know there's a ton of stuff out there at the minute. I've never really get into it in a lot of sort of depth, but like that sort of, how do you plan for data transfer charges? That's definitely one to kind of look at if you've got a large data footprint. You know, you want to have good sort of thoughts and
that's when you link into some operational business processes there, and any kind of backups or DRs or whatever. It's you want to be careful that those you don't get the high charge for those.
Yeah, ingress and egress, especially if you're going multi-region, can be a massive cost. You know, so you need to be just aware of there's costs for data moving around regions.
Yeah, and then the last two kind of finishing up are the matching supply and demand and optimizing over the time. And I've kind of lumped these together because there's a little bit of keeping up with the latest and greatest in AWS and tweaking your design so that you're continually efficient. And there's also a bit about selecting new services as you build new stuff and selecting wisely what's going to have a decent kind of cost impact.
Yeah, and I think this is where we see the serverless advantage really kicking in here around matching supply and demand. You know, it's sort of taking care for you, right? It scales with the load. But if you're on more traditional architectures, if you're on EC2, if you might need to pre-provision some of this stuff, you might have to think about having stuff at hand ready to go, and that's a hard calculation to get right. So you're going to have a lot of wastage there, just with excess capacity, just waiting to go whenever the demand comes in. So it's a lot easier when you're serverless.
Being able to extrapolate your kind of costs based on various dimensions, I think that's important.
That's it. So that's a crack. That's the cost optimization pillar. We'll hit the sustainability one next. So please give us a like or a follow on YouTube or the podcast. Our blog is at theserverlessedge.com, and give us a wee follow on @serverlessedge on Twitter. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.